Hey guys, alright, well, one thing has changed. The camera, I have centered my camera. Yeah, that's about the only thing that's changed. Uh, my brain is just now, it's just weird. Alright, today we're going to be watching another potential history video, this time on the Japanese tank meme. Now, I know I think I have a better understanding of Japanese tank than I do the Italian tanks, which was the last tank meme video that we watched. Um, Still doesn't mean I know much. I think obviously the tanks had to be designed in a certain way so that they could move through the jungles that is the Pacific area that the Japanese would be fighting in. Aside from maybe slight understanding of design, I don't really know much. I don't really know if they were even that significant in any battles. I don't think they were. Um, Maybe in China. China, they were probably very useful. But when fighting the Americans on the islands, I don't think they were used much at all. But anyways, let's go ahead and well, see if potential history here tells us what I'm wondering.
Oh yeah, that's a
And this is
fine
totally gonna get claimed.
looking. Don't. Okay, no big deal. Stupid
Navy.
Oh my god, yeah. So another thing that the Japanese had going on is they kind of had a rivalry going on between the Navy and the Army, one wanting to, be more important than the other. Now, I don't exactly know the intricacies of this. All I know is that there was a rivalry that happened and they kind of blamed stuff on each other.
You gotta build fast.
The Americans are coming.
Yeah, that's one fine looking.
Tank.
Why doesn't mine look like that? Why must life be so hard?
How's your father's project coming along? I think he's almost done. Yeah, he's done.
Japanese tanks are viewed as a meme. Believe me, I know. Just go read the comments on the Hago video.
Bars!
And given their performance at Konkangal and against the Americans, it's understandable how they got this stigma and how it seeped into the popular consensus.
By the way, the Pacific miniseries, it's good. I enjoyed it. I really liked it. It's also got Rami Malek in it. So, it's good.
But I think this doesn't take everything into account and is sort of unfair to the designers. So here's a brief overview of Japanese tanks. Like almost all countries after World War I, Japan witnessed what modern warfare had become over those 4 years, and wanted to catch up in 3 major areas: tanks, planes, and radio communication. On the tank side, they did what just about everyone else did and imported foreign models post-war to test. These included a British Mark IV, a handful of Whippets, and a few orders of FT-17s. As these tanks arrived, Japanese Minister of War, this guy whose name I can't pronounce,
Is that a U or a V? I think that's a U. Kazushise Usaki? Kazushise Usaki. I probably butchered the first name, but I think I did okay on the last name.
embarked on an overall program of demobilization with the goal of quality over quantity in mind, taking a few divisions and remaking them into the 1st Japanese Tank Battalion on May 1st, 1925. This, though, received a lot of pushback from other branches and even the army itself due to the culture of the Japanese army. One thing needed to understand Japanese tank development, and the country's military actions as a whole, is the fierce competition between the branches. The Navy was always fighting with the Army, and for most of the war, more traditional generals in the Army fought the newer ones on this whole concept of mechanization, which they saw as a waste of time. Ugaki, however, pressed on. Once the Japanese have worked
Wait, that was a G? Not an S? Hold up.
which they saw as a waste of time. Ugaki
That looks more like an S, my dude. That does not look like a G. Well, I guess, if I were observant, I would see that this is the S. So that would be a different. Okay. All right. Kazushige Ugaki. Probably butchered it.
Ugaki, however, pressed on. Once the Japanese had worked enough with the foreign models, they decided it was time to develop one domestically. And this task fell to Tomi Ohara, head of the new Army Technical Bureau. This, though, was going to be quite a task as Japanese industry had at this point only produced trucks and some small tractors. The first model was Experimental Tank No. 1, which was deemed too large and slow but proved Hara's capability, although it was never mass-produced. The second model, that was deemed to be sufficient, was the first mass-produced diesel-powered tank in the world, the Type 89. Small side note about Japanese tank designations: the Japanese calendar, which they used at the time, began in 660 BCE upon the founding of the country. So for example, the Type 89 tank was introduced in 1929, which was the year 2589 in their calendar, and they used the last two numbers of the year in the name. There was also a method to naming the tanks once multiple vehicles began being developed in the same year, beginning with a designation for its role, such as Chi for medium tanks and the Chi-Ha, or Ho for SPGs like the Ho-Ro, and so on.
What? That is so complicated. Huh. Well, I guess it's simplified if obviously, it makes sense if you're, in Japan at that time. But obviously, looking back today, that's pretty complicated in my brain, in my simple brain. But damn, Potential History always does some great fucking research.
Link something in the description that goes into more detail if you're interested. There was, however, a big question: how to use these tanks that at the time of the early to mid-30s were very capable in their design, but had no doctrine yet. And the same question that was being bickered over in Europe arose: should they support the infantry, or be used as their own arm in a combined force? The whole Britain v. France, which war theory is better thing. Now, although this answer is obvious now, it was not back then. The European countries had only been able to test their theories in war games so far, and the topic was equally contentious in Japan. But in 1933, they seemed to have found an answer. After initial gains into Manchuria, the Japanese force began to advance further into China proper in the Battle of Rihi. With the Chinese warlords' troops on the run, General Yoshikazu Nishi decided to pursue the chase with mechanized infantry to great effect by exploiting a breakthrough down the Jinzhou-Jiaoyang Highway, disrupting...
Damn, showing off your language skills there. That's impressive. At least, one American to another, pronouncing Chinese names. Because, oh my god, I took a Chinese history course and I sucked at pronouncing a lot of the names there. I just kind of avoided speaking them because I knew I'd butcher them.
Disrupting Chinese defenses ahead of the main Japanese force. Sound familiar? This, among another handful of uses of tanks, showed their use.
Wow, this is really cool. It's really helping getting a better understanding of, I guess, context or events that are happening kind of simultaneously around the world, right? You've got the Japanese here on the Asian side trying to figure out how tanks work, and then of course you have the same question being pondered over in Europe. This is really cool to get this side of things.
Usefulness in a combined arms assault. This vindicated Japanese generals in favor of the tank, with the independent mixed brigade being created, and also adding the Type 95 Ha-Go, the Japanese equivalent to the 7-ton infantry tanks being produced all over Europe, to their arsenal in 1936 after previous development starting in 1934. These lessons, however, were utterly ignored in 1937 under Tojo, who decided to spread out the armored force in a more infantry-centered attack plan. This change in tactics proved especially poor at battles like Zinkao against Central Chinese Army forces with proper anti-tank guns, who found the thinly spread Japanese tanks as easy and rare targets. Because of this, the Japanese High Command decided that combined arms doctrine was a failure, thinking of 1937 and not 1933. Because of this, the independent mixed brigade was effectively disbanded, although tank production and development continued, with much of its resources being diverted to other branches. Due to this, tank development and increased production became more difficult and was mostly put on the back burner until two major things happened almost simultaneously. The first was Nomonhan, where the Japanese got a very bloody nose from the Soviets, showing the weakness of their armored force against a combined arms force behind Zhukov, and second, the effective use of combined arms tactics being used by the Germans to great effect in Europe that the Japanese had a front row seat to through the eyes of those sent to sign the Axis Pact.
The name that he gave Goering just processed it in my head. Fat drug addict. That was Goering. Yeah, he was a fat drug addict. I mean, a lot of the Nazis, top Nazi brass, were drug addicts.
This prompted the Japanese High Command to reevaluate their stance, forming the Mechanization Headquarters to develop mechanized units and tactics. This, however, was too little too late, as with the upcoming drive into Southeast Asia and the attack on Pearl Harbor and the Chinese front bogging down into a stalemate, the Navy, the Army's rival, had received production priority, making the creation of new and better tanks impractical and nearly impossible, as the Japanese Army would be island hopping for the foreseeable future, and more ships and easily transportable light tanks would be needed. Hara was not completely done, though. Upgrades to the Type 97 were made to make it more capable in an anti-tank role, resulting in the Chiakai. And during the Burma campaign, the British would comment on the effectiveness of Japanese tank movements through the jungle, taking them by surprise with large mechanized attacks. What is it with the Axis and going through forests? Japanese tanks were also used to great effect in the Philippines in 1941. But overall, the sun had set.
Hey man, the Axis, they're just drawn to those forests, you know? They just love them.
On the Japanese tank project, with them using models that were years outdated for the duration of the war that paled in comparison to the Sherman, the main battle tank that the Japanese ran into from this point on. And this is the real reason Japanese tanks are seen as so bad. The point in the war where they are outdated and used sparingly is the point that, at least in the West, is given the most attention. And looking at this point, the Japanese look like they simply don't know how to design a tank. But in reality, the forces behind the curtain misread the situation entirely in the 30s, back when Japanese tanks were very capable, and came around, to the arguably more correct point of view, far too late to breathe life back into the Japanese tank program and set up new lines of production and develop new designs. There were a handful of more capable designs made later in the war, mostly ones stretching the Type 97 hull to its limits, that would have been more effective, but were retained for the defense of the potential invasion of the home islands and never saw service. So hopefully this video clears up some of the questions as to why Japanese tanks were so ineffective. There's a lot more on this topic, but I figured I'd cut it off here before it goes on for too long. For more info, I can't recommend Steven Zaloga's books enough. He covers everything in a very concise and interesting way, and I'll link them below. Also, for more information on the Ha-Go specifically, check out the video I did on it, and I plan to release a similar one on the Type 97 too. If you live anywhere in the Midwest and you would like to see some of these Japanese tanks up close, I implore you to go visit the Indiana Military Museum, who has both a Type 95 and Type 97 on display. They're actually having a Living History event that I plan to attend on Labor Day weekend, and they should have both tanks out for display at that time if you want to take a closer look, as well as running some of the other ones they own. As always, I would like to...
Too bad there's COVID around, so I ain't going nowhere, especially Indiana, because, oh boy, their numbers are not good. Yeah, that was a good video. That was really informative. I love it. I love Potential History. He always does some great fucking World War II research. So yeah. Nothing's really popping into my head as to what I want to add, or really, I feel like he answered the questions that I had. The reason the tanks were not really used against the United States is because, well, their production was focused on their Navy by the time they had the U.S. entered the war, so they didn't really could produce the tanks, right? But they did produce the light tanks, but the light tanks are obviously, you know, they don't have much armor. They're supposed to be able to be mass-produced and easily moved from their production center to the islands, from what I understood from the brief moment that he brought it up in the video. So they're not going to be that able to hold up against much, like, it won't take much of a caliber to really pierce that armor or destroy it, right? But yeah, it was a good video. I learned a lot about the Japanese tanks, mainly about the production. And it's actually really interesting, though, to hear that at the beginning, the Japanese were kind of ahead of the ball game. Their tanks were ahead of, like, kind of the rest of the world, and their understanding of the tactics were as well, except then something happened, as he said, and they would misread a situation, and that would cause them no longer to really focus on the tanks. Yeah, that is the video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Leave a suggestion down below for what you want to see me react to next. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you.